Hey guys, tonight we step quietly into a world where candlelight trembles on stone walls, where ink stains your fingers, and where curiosity itself can be dangerous. You stand in a narrow medieval room that smells faintly of wax, dust, and damp wood, holding a scrap of parchment that promises knowledge most people around you are not supposed to seek.
Somewhere outside, a bell rings slowly, marking the hour in a village where everyone knows everyone, and where unusual ideas travel faster than travelers. You probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe.
Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together.
You wake before dawn, not because you are disciplined, but because the cold stone floor beneath your thin blanket refuses to let you sleep any longer. Your breath forms a faint cloud in the air. Outside, the world is quiet, except for distant roosters and the slow creak of a wooden cart somewhere down the road. This is not the life of a knight, a king, or even a well-fed merchant.
This is the life of someone who has chosen, or perhaps stumbled into, a stranger path, the path of a medieval magician. In this world, the word magician does not mean colorful robes and applause. It means curiosity, secrecy, and danger wrapped in the thin disguise of scholarship. You are not casting fireballs or pulling rabbits from hats. You are searching for patterns in the stars, hidden meanings in texts, and invisible forces that might explain why some crops grow and others fail, why some people heal and others fade.
You sit up slowly, careful not to disturb the small bundle of papers hidden beneath your straw mattress. Those papers are your treasure and your risk. They contain copied fragments of old writings, notes from traveling scholars, half-understood diagrams of strange circles and symbols. You copied them late at night by candlelight, because owning a full book would be too expensive and too suspicious.
In medieval Europe, books are rare, precious, and powerful. Monasteries guard them like jewels, and most people will never see one in their entire lives. Yet here you are, not only reading, but interpreting. A mainstream historical fact quietly shapes your fate. Literacy in the Middle Ages is limited mostly to clergy and elites, so anyone who reads too much outside those circles stands out immediately.
You stretch your stiff fingers and wonder, not for the first time, whether standing out is a good idea. Outside, the village begins to stir. Smoke rises from chimneys, carrying the smell of bread and burning wood. Somewhere, a dog barks at nothing in particular. You pull on your rough wool tunic and step toward the door. The wood is warped from years of damp weather, and it opens with a soft groan, as if even the house is tired of secrets.
As you step into the morning air, you feel the strange double life you are living. To most people here, you are just another quiet villager, perhaps a slightly odd one who asks too many questions and spends too much time alone. To yourself, you are something else entirely, a seeker of hidden knowledge in an age that does not fully trust seekers.
You walk toward the edge of the village, where a small stream flows past mossy stones. The water is cold and clear, reflecting the pale sky. You kneel and splash your face, letting the chill wake your mind. In the rippling surface, you see not just your reflection, but your uncertainty. Why did you choose this path? Maybe it began with a traveler who once passed through your village, telling stories of distant cities where scholars debated the nature of the universe. Maybe it began with a monk who casually mentioned that the stars moved in patterns that could be understood. Or maybe it began with boredom, the dangerous kind that makes ordinary life feel too small. Historians still argue whether magic was mostly superstition or an early form of scientific thinking. As you stand by the stream, you feel caught between those two worlds. You are not trying to summon demons or bend reality like a legend. You are trying to understand how reality works. Unfortunately, the people around you do not always see the difference. You return to your small room and light a candle. The flame flickers, casting long shadows across the walls. Shadows are comforting in a way. They make everything feel mysterious rather than frightening. You unfold one of your papers and trace a diagram with your finger. It shows a rough map of the heavens, copied from a manuscript you once glimpsed in a monastery corridor.
A quirky tidbit whispers through your thoughts. Some medieval scholars believed that certain stones or metals could remember the influence of stars if exposed to the sky at the right moment. You are not entirely sure whether this is wisdom or poetic nonsense, but you like the idea. It makes the universe feel alive, like a quiet companion rather than an indifferent machine.
You spend the next hour scribbling notes with a homemade ink that smells faintly of iron and vinegar. Your handwriting is uneven, partly because the quill is awkward, and partly because your mind moves faster than your hand. Every line you write feels like a tiny rebellion against ignorance, and also like a tiny invitation to trouble.
Soon, footsteps sound outside your door. You freeze. In this world, footsteps can mean anything, from a friendly neighbor to someone who has heard rumors about you. After a moment, the steps pass by, and you exhale slowly. You laugh quietly to yourself. Imagine explaining to someone that you are not dangerous, just curious. That would go over beautifully.
Later in the morning, you walk through the village market. People greet you politely but cautiously. The baker hands you a small loaf of bread, and you thank him with a nod. He looks at your ink-stained fingers and raises an eyebrow, but says nothing. Silence, you have learned, is sometimes kinder than questions.
As you walk past the church, you feel a familiar tension. The stone building is massive compared to the surrounding houses, its walls thick and ancient. Inside, priests discuss theology and doctrine with confidence. Outside, you wonder whether your quiet experiments belong to the same world as their sermons, or to something dangerously adjacent. The bell tolls again, slow and heavy. Each strike feels like a reminder that time moves forward, whether you understand it or not. You sit on a low stone wall and watch clouds drift across the sky. Their shapes change so gradually that it feels like watching thoughts form in the mind of the world itself. You imagine that somewhere above those clouds, invisible lines connect stars, seasons, and human lives. You probably won't survive this, not because of monsters or dramatic battles, but because knowledge itself is fragile here. One misunderstanding, one rumor, one wrong person discovering your papers, and your quiet life could unravel. Still, as the sunlight warms your face, you feel something stronger than fear. It is the gentle thrill of curiosity. It is the feeling that the world is larger, deeper, and stranger than most people are willing to admit.
You stand up slowly, brushing dust from your tunic. Somewhere in your pocket, a folded piece of parchment waits, filled with questions you do not yet know how to answer. Somewhere in the distance, a road leads away from the village, toward monasteries, cities, and unknown teachers. For now, you are just a medieval magician at the very beginning of your journey, balanced between wonder and danger, between silence and discovery, between survival and the irresistible pull of hidden knowledge. And as the day unfolds around you, quietly and steadily, you sense that this path you have chosen will never truly be safe, never truly be simple, and never truly let you turn back. You do not learn magic the way one learns a trade.
There is no apprenticeship contract nailed to a door, no guild hall where experienced masters hand you a sensible checklist. Instead, learning begins with listening, quietly, and remembering which questions not to ask out loud. You discover quickly that curiosity must be practiced like a skill, careful and controlled, or it becomes a liability. Your education happens in fragments, a phrase overheard from a monk while pretending to admire the architecture, a half-faded diagram glimpsed when a traveling scholar briefly opens his satchel, a story shared by a merchant who swears he once met a man who could calculate eclipses without looking at the sky. Each piece arrives out of order, like a puzzle with no picture on the box. A mainstream historical fact shapes this stage of your life. Medieval learning is mostly transmitted orally or through hand-copied texts, which means errors, exaggerations, and personal interpretations multiply quickly. You are not just learning information, you are inheriting misunderstandings, opinions, and centuries of marginal notes. You sit on a low bench outside the village on afternoons when the weather allows, pretending to rest while you listen to travelers talk. Pilgrims, traders, and wandering clerics pass through, bringing news from other towns, and sometimes from other intellectual worlds. You learn to smile politely, nod often, and file away details without reacting. Reacting makes people suspicious. One traveler mentions that in a distant city, scholars argue about whether numbers exist independently of things or only as human inventions. You do not fully understand the debate, but it keeps you awake that night, staring at the ceiling. Historians still argue whether such philosophical disputes filtered meaningfully into village life, but you feel their weight anyway, pressing gently on your thoughts. When books appear, they are never complete. You borrow a few pages copied by someone else, or you glimpse a volume chained to a lectern in a monastery. Chained books are a real thing, meant to prevent theft, and you briefly imagine trying to explain to a monk that you only want to borrow it overnight. Even you recognize that would be an ambitious plan. So you copy quickly. You train your hand to move faster than your nerves, tracing letters you barely understand. You memorize passages because paper is expensive, and memories are harder to confiscate. The irony does not escape you. You are becoming dangerous, largely because you are learning to remember things.
At night, you practice by candlelight, the flame flickering just enough to make letters dance. Shadows ripple across the walls, and you occasionally look up, convinced for half a second that someone is watching. No one ever is, but your pulse still jumps. Medieval education comes with a built-in sense of paranoia. A quirky tidbit slips into your studies from a battered manuscript. Some medieval thinkers believed that knowledge itself could physically alter the body, reshaping the mind and even affecting health. You briefly wonder if your frequent headaches are a sign of enlightenment or just poor lighting. It is probably the lighting.
Your teachers, if they can be called that, are inconsistent at best. One insists that astrology holds the key to understanding human destiny. Another scoffs and says stars only influence the tides. A third warns you not to question too much, because questioning tends to lead to consequences. You nod respectfully to all of them, collecting contradictions like souvenirs. You learn Latin slowly, painfully, because most scholarly texts insist on it. Each new word feels like unlocking a door that opens into 3 more locked doors. Sometimes you mispronounce a phrase and get corrected with a look that suggests mild disappointment mixed with concern for your soul. You apologize and make a note to practice quietly later. Your lack of a safety net becomes more obvious as time passes. Apprentices and trades have masters to defend them. Clergy have the church. You have notes hidden under straw and a reputation that could turn sour overnight. When a concept confuses you, there is no one safe to ask. You simply sit with it until it softens, or until you move on. You test ideas in harmless ways. You observe how shadows change length throughout the day. You track the moon's phases on scraps of parchment. You note when people fall ill and when they recover, looking for patterns that may or may not exist. This feels reasonable to you, though you understand how easily it could sound ominous to others. One afternoon, you attempt to explain an astronomical concept to a friend using pebbles and a stick. Halfway through, you realize you have lost them entirely. They nod politely and change the subject to the weather, which feels safer for both of you. You take the hint.
Historians still argue whether medieval magicians saw themselves as mystics or natural philosophers. From where you sit, cold stone under you and chalk dust on your fingers, the distinction feels academic. You are simply trying to learn without being noticed too much, which might be the most medieval skill of all. There are moments of excitement. When a complex idea finally clicks, you feel a quiet thrill, like finding a hidden stairway in a familiar building. These moments keep you going. They make the cold, the fear, and the uncertainty feel temporarily worthwhile.
There are also moments of absurdity. You spend 3 days trying to understand a diagram, only to realize later that the copyist accidentally mirrored it. You laugh softly, alone in your room, because laughing loudly at medieval scholarship feels risky. That counts as one of your life's safer jokes. As your knowledge grows, so does your awareness of how little protection you have. Learning without permission is a delicate act. You must always balance ambition with caution, curiosity with silence. You remind yourself often that survival requires restraint, not brilliance.
Still, when you extinguish your candle at night and lie back on the straw mattress, your mind refuses to rest. Ideas drift through your thoughts like slow-moving clouds. You imagine a future where learning is safer, where questions are welcomed instead of feared. For now, though, you are learning magic without a net, inching forward through a world that does not quite know what to do with people like you. And as sleep finally comes, you sense that every new thing you learn tightens the invisible thread between knowledge and danger just a little more. Your relationship with books becomes complicated very quickly. You do not simply read them, you manage them, hide them, and worry about them the way other people worry about livestock or children. A book in your world is not a neutral object. It is a signal, and signals, you've learned, attract attention. You are keenly aware of a mainstream historical fact that shapes your daily behavior. In much of medieval Europe, the ability to read is rare, and uncontrolled access to texts is often viewed with suspicion. Literacy suggests education, education suggests power, and power without permission makes people uneasy. So you learn to read discreetly, as if letters themselves might whisper your secrets to the wrong ears. Most of the time, you do not own books at all. You own pieces of them, loose pages, copied passages, marginal notes written by someone who copied someone else, who once saw the original. This is knowledge several generations removed from its source, like a rumor that has learned Latin.
When you do encounter a full book, it feels almost unreal. The weight of it in your hands is grounding, solid, as if knowledge has finally agreed to be tangible. The binding creaks when you open it, releasing a smell of old leather and dust that makes you strangely emotional. You take a slow breath, because moments like this are rare and never last as long as you want them to.
You read standing up, often, because sitting invites comfort, and comfort invites lingering. Lingering invites questions. You train yourself to scan quickly, to recognize patterns in dense blocks of text, to skip sections that feel like theological traps. You are not here to debate angels on pinheads. You are here to understand how the world behaves when no one is watching.
At night, back in your small room, you transcribe what you can remember. Your quill scratches softly against parchment, a sound that feels both soothing and dangerous. You pause often, listening for footsteps. None come, but you keep listening anyway. Paranoia, you decide, is just caution that has been awake too long.
A quirky tidbit slips into your notes from a half-legible manuscript. Some medieval scholars believed that different inks carried different symbolic properties, and that red ink in particular could strengthen certain ideas written with it. You briefly consider switching inks, then decide that attracting attention with colorful manuscripts would be a bold move, and not in a good way.
Your fingers are almost permanently stained now, dark with ink that no amount of washing fully removes. People notice. The baker notices, the blacksmith notices, children notice and ask questions, which is frankly the most alarming part. You smile and say you help the priest with records, which is not entirely untrue if you define help loosely and records even more loosely.
There is an odd social tension around reading. Some people admire it, quietly. They ask you to read letters for them, to decipher contracts or prayers. You help when you can, because refusing would be suspicious, and because kindness builds goodwill. At the same time, you never read too confidently. Confidence looks like authority, and authority invites challenges.
You keep your voice steady, slightly uncertain, as if the letters themselves are doing most of the work. This is a performance you did not expect to master, but here you are, acting the part of a modest reader, in a world where modesty can be a survival strategy.
One evening, a neighbor catches you reading by candlelight through a cracked door. The moment stretches uncomfortably. You exchange polite greetings. They comment on how late you're awake. You reply with a shrug and mention copying a prayer. They nod slowly and move on. You close the door and stand very still, listening until your heartbeat calms. That was closer than you'd like. Historians still argue whether widespread fear of literacy existed at the village level, or whether it's exaggerated by later accounts. From your perspective, it doesn't matter. Fear does not need to be universal to be effective. It only needs to exist in the wrong person at the wrong time.
Your notes multiply, and with them, your problem. Where do you keep them? Under the mattress works until it doesn't. In a hollowed beam seems clever until you imagine someone repairing the roof. You eventually divide them into bundles, hiding them in different places. It feels excessive until you remember that knowledge is lighter than furniture and easier to burn. There is also the quiet fear of misinterpretation. A symbol copied without context can look sinister. A diagram meant to describe planetary motion can resemble something ritualistic if viewed by someone already suspicious. You consider adding explanations, then realize explanations only create more text to explain. So you leave things incomplete, trusting that only you will ever read them. You make small jokes to yourself to stay calm. If anyone ever asks why you're awake so late, you'll tell them insomnia is a spiritual practice. You imagine how that conversation would go and quietly decide never to test it. That's joke number 1, safely confined to your head.
Occasionally, you hear sermons warning against forbidden knowledge. The priest speaks in careful tones, never naming specifics, but the message settles over the congregation like a fine dust. You sit still, eyes down, heart steady. You know these warnings are meant broadly, but you also know how easily broadly becomes personally.
Despite the risks, reading changes you. Your thoughts grow more structured, more curious. You begin to notice inconsistencies in explanations you once accepted without question. This is both exhilarating and isolating. You cannot share these thoughts freely, so they circle back on themselves, growing louder in the quiet.
One night, you attempt to organize your notes into some kind of system. Categories, headings, cross-references. It feels wonderfully modern and completely impractical. Halfway through, you abandon the effort and laugh softly. Congratulations, you've invented stress. That's joke number 2, and it's not even inaccurate. The truth is, books make you visible even when no one is looking. They shape how you speak, how you think, how you hesitate before answering simple questions. You carry your literacy with you like a faint glow that only some people notice. And those people are rarely the ones you want noticing. As you extinguish your candle and lie back, eyes adjusting to the darkness, you think about the strange power of words. Silent, fragile, dangerous. You wonder how many others, like you, lie awake across the countryside, memorizing lines by heart because paper is too risky. You drift toward sleep, knowing that every letter you learn brings clarity and risk in equal measure. In a world where most people live by tradition and habit, you live by ink and memory. And as comforting as knowledge can be, you are beginning to understand that it may also be the thing that gives you away. You begin to understand that alchemy is less about gold and more about patience, damp stone, and smells that cling to your clothes no matter how hard you scrub. Your workshop, if it deserves the name, is a borrowed corner of a shed near the edge of the village, where rain seeps through the roof and mice feel entitled to your supplies. Still, it is secluded, and seclusion is a rare luxury. A mainstream historical fact quietly underpins your work here. Medieval alchemy is not a fringe oddity, but a serious intellectual pursuit tied closely to medicine, metallurgy, and natural philosophy. Many respected scholars experiment with substances, convinced that matter follows rules that can be understood. Unfortunately, the villagers mostly associate bubbling liquids with trouble. You arrange your tools carefully each morning. A small clay furnace, a chipped crucible, a few glass vessels acquired through favors and quiet trades. Glass is expensive and fragile, and every time you handle it, you feel like you're borrowing time from the future. You move slowly, deliberately, because haste leads to spills, and spills lead to questions. You light the fire and wait for it to settle into a steady glow. The warmth is welcome, though it brings with it a faint metallic tag. Alchemy is sensory work. You listen for subtle changes in sound, watch colors shift in the heat, and inhale carefully, because inhaling carelessly once taught you a lesson you will not repeat. You coughed for an entire afternoon and told everyone you had a seasonal chill. That was optimistic. Your experiments are modest. You are not trying to transmute lead into gold, despite what popular imagination insists. Mostly, you are observing how substances react, how sulfur behaves when heated, how mercury moves like something alive, how metals soften and harden. These are small questions, but they feel enormous when you are the one asking them. A quirky tidbit finds its way into your routine. Some alchemists believe that the emotional state of the experimenter can influence results. Calm hands, calm mind, better outcomes. You try to stay calm, though the thought that anxiety might ruin your work does not exactly help with anxiety. Still, you breathe slowly and pretend you are in control. That counts as emotional regulation, medieval style. You keep notes sparingly. Writing too much in the workshop feels risky. Instead, you memorize sequences, whispering them under your breath like recipes. Heat, cool, grind, repeat. Occasionally, you forget a step and must decide whether to trust your intuition or abandon the attempt. You abandon more often than you'd like. Survival has taught you that unfinished experiments are safer than finished mistakes. The shed smells permanently of smoke, damp earth, and something sharp you cannot name. You tell people it's a storage space for tools, which is technically true. Tools for thinking, but still. When someone wanders too close, you shift your body to block their view, smiling casually while your heart performs what can only be described as interpretive dance. That's joke number one, and it's doing a lot of work. You notice patterns emerging over weeks and months. Certain mixtures behave predictably. Certain temperatures produce consistent results. This excites you more than it probably should. You remind yourself to stay humble, because confidence in alchemy has a reputation for turning into arrogance, and arrogance has a reputation for turning into trouble. Historians still argue whether medieval alchemists genuinely believed in physical transmutation or used it as symbolic language for spiritual change. Standing over your furnace, sweat on your brow, you suspect the answer is both, depending on the day and the person. Right now, you mostly believe in not setting anything on fire.
One afternoon, a minor success startles you. A substance changes color exactly as predicted. You stare at it, stunned, then glance around to make sure no one saw. You feel a surge of pride, followed immediately by dread. Success attracts attention, and attention is expensive. You let the mixture cool and quietly dismantle the setup, heart still racing. Later, you allow yourself a private smile. You did something right. In a world that rarely confirms your efforts, this feels monumental. You reward yourself with a joke no one else will hear. Congratulations, you've discovered chemistry, but centuries early and with worse ventilation. Joke number 2, and yes, it's bitter.
Not all days go well. Sometimes a vessel cracks, spilling its contents onto the dirt floor. Sometimes a reaction fizzles into nothing. Sometimes you misjudge heat and ruin hours of careful preparation. On those days, you sit on an upturned crate and stare at your hands, wondering if curiosity is worth the constant frustration. You clean everything meticulously. Residue invites suspicion, and suspicion invites inspection. You bury waste far from the shed, or dissolve it in water and scatter it downstream. You feel a twinge of guilt about that, then remind yourself that everyone else is dumping far worse things into the same stream. Perspective helps, even if it doesn't fix anything.
There is always the risk of misunderstanding. A villager once glimpses a strange residue on your fingers and asks if you're ill. You laugh lightly and say it's soot. They nod, satisfied. Soot is familiar. Soot is safe. You make a mental note to keep your hands cleaner, though you both know that will not last. Alchemy also attracts rumors. You hear whispers about someone in a nearby town who played with metals and met a bad end. Details vary wildly, which does not help. You tell yourself stories travel faster than facts, but fear travels fastest of all. You work more quietly after that, reducing your experiments to the bare essentials.
Despite everything, there is a meditative quality to the work. Watching substances change slowly, predictably, feels grounding. It reminds you that not everything in the world is arbitrary or hostile. Some things respond consistently to care and attention. That thought steadies you more than prayer ever did. As evening falls, you extinguish the furnace and let the shed cool. The air grows still. You pack your tools carefully, erasing signs of activity. Another day without disaster feels like an achievement. You stretch your stiff back and laugh softly. If survival had a curriculum, this would be an advanced course. That's joke number 3, and it's earned.
You walk home under a darkening sky, clothes smelling faintly of smoke and metal. You blend into the twilight, just another figure returning from work. No one needs to know what kind of work it was. Lying down later, muscles aching, you replay the day's observations in your mind. Tiny changes, small victories, quiet failures. Alchemy has not made you rich or powerful. It has made you careful, patient, and increasingly aware that knowledge in this world must be handled like fire, useful, illuminating, and always one mistake away from getting you burned. You start paying closer attention to the sky, because it is one of the few places you are allowed to look without suspicion. Everyone looks up sometimes. Farmers glance at clouds, sailors watch the horizon, priests speak of heaven. You, meanwhile, are quietly counting.
Astrology feels safer than alchemy at first. There is no smoke, no strange smells, no chance of accidentally dissolving something important. Just stars moving slowly and predictably, far above village gossip. A mainstream historical fact anchors your practice here. Astrology in the medieval world is widely accepted among scholars and physicians, used to time medical treatments, predict weather,
and advise rulers. It is not fringe, it is fashionable. That makes it tempting.
You begin with observation. Night after night, you step outside with a simple chart scratched onto parchment. You track the moon's phases, noting how its light changes the landscape. You mark where certain stars rise and set, aligning them with familiar landmarks. The work is quiet, repetitive, and oddly soothing.
You quickly learn that astrology is as much interpretation as calculation. The stars move, yes, but what they mean is flexible. That flexibility is both its strength and its danger. Make a prediction vague enough, and it can never be wrong. Make it specific, and people will remember. You are careful. You whisper star names under your breath, partly to remember them, and partly because whispering makes the night feel cooperative. The cold air sharpens your senses. Crickets chirp. Somewhere an owl calls. You feel small in the best possible way, like a footnote in a very large book. A quirky tidbit sneaks into your notes. Some medieval astrologers believed that simply looking at the stars at the wrong time could influence your temperament. You briefly wonder if your occasional irritability is cosmically induced or just hunger. You eat some bread and decide it's probably hunger. Astrology loses that round. As your confidence grows, people begin to notice. Not loudly, just small comments. Someone mentions you're often outside at night. Another asks, jokingly, if you're counting angels. You smile and say you like the air. Fresh air is difficult to argue with.
Eventually, someone asks you a question. A harmless one at first. Will the weather hold? Is it a good time to plant? These are acceptable inquiries. Astrology is allowed to overlap with farming and medicine. It becomes suspicious only when it strays into fate. You answer carefully, couching everything in probabilities and natural signs. Clouds, seasons, experience. The stars are there, but you let them stay politely in the background.
Historians still argue whether medieval people truly believed astrology controlled their lives or simply found comfort in its structure. From your perspective, belief seems less important than usefulness. Astrology gives people a framework, and frameworks are calming. You offer calm whenever you can.
Then comes the dangerous question. Someone asks about luck. Not crops, not weather. Luck. You feel the shift immediately. Luck implies destiny, and destiny implies authority. You pause longer than usual before answering, choosing words that will not echo later. You say that luck changes, that effort matters, that no sign is absolute. They nod, perhaps disappointed, perhaps relieved. You make a private rule that night. Never predict personal outcomes. It's one thing to read the sky. It's another to rewrite someone's expectations. Expectations, you've learned, have sharp edges. You refine your charts, adding small corrections based on what you observe. You notice that older charts sometimes contradict each other. You realize that many were copied and recopied, each time introducing small errors. This both annoys and reassures you. Even the stars, it seems, are subject to human clumsiness. One evening, you miscalculate the moon's position and confidently expect a brighter night than what arrives. You stand there, blinking up at the dim sky, feeling foolish. No one else notices. You quietly adjust your notes and laugh under your breath. Joke number 1. Congratulations, you've disappointed the moon. It remains unmoved. Astrology also brings moral questions. If the stars suggest hardship ahead, is it kind to say so? If they suggest fortune, is it responsible? You find yourself erring on the side of understatement. Neutral skies, mixed signs, uncertain outcomes. These phrases become your armor. You notice how differently people respond. Some cling to predictions, others dismiss them outright. Most fall somewhere in between, using astrology the way one uses a weather forecast, informative but not binding. This middle ground feels safest, and you linger there intentionally. At night, alone, you allow yourself more speculation. You imagine vast cycles,
repeating patterns, influences too subtle to name. You feel awe, not control. That distinction matters to you. Control attracts enemies. Awe just makes you quiet.
A sermon one week warns against those who claim to read fate in the heavens. The words hang in the air longer than usual. You sit still, eyes down, heartbeat steady. You remind yourself that you have claimed nothing. You read patterns, not destinies. You hope the distinction holds.
You scale back your public observations after that. Less time outside, more time thinking. Astrology becomes something you practice inwardly, privately. You continue to learn, but you stop sharing. Knowledge, once again, retreats into silence. Still, the sky remains a comfort. No matter how complicated life becomes, the stars continue their slow, reliable movement. They do not care about rumors, sermons, or village politics. That indifference feels kind.
As you lie down at night, you replay constellations in your mind, tracing lines between distant points. You think about how many generations before you did the same, and how many after you will too. You feel connected, briefly, safely. Astrology does not save you. It does not protect you from suspicion or error, but it teaches you restraint, humility, and the value of uncertainty. And in a world eager for absolute answers, choosing uncertainty might be the most survivable magic you know.
Eventually, people stop asking you about the stars and start asking you about their bodies. This shift is subtle, almost polite, but it carries more weight than you expect. Illness is intimate. Pain lowers skepticism. And when someone is hurting, they care far less about where your knowledge comes from and far more about whether it might help.
You do not call yourself a healer. That would be reckless. Instead, you become someone who knows things, which is vague enough to be tolerated. A mainstream historical fact quietly supports this role. Medieval medicine commonly blends herbal remedies, religious prayer, folk wisdom, and classical theory, often without clear boundaries between them. No one expects certainty. They expect effort.
Your first requests are small. A headache, a fever that won't break, a rash that worries someone's mother. You listen carefully, ask gentle questions, and offer what you can without promising miracles. Herbs are your safest tools. Everyone trusts plants, especially plants their grandparents also trusted. You dry leaves in the corner of your room, hanging them from twine like unassuming decorations. Rosemary, sage, yarrow. Each has a reputation, passed down through generations. You learn their smells, their textures, the way they crumble between your fingers. Working with herbs feels grounded, domestic, and less likely to get you arrested. All strong points.
You combine remedies with words, prayers, charms, instructions, spoken softly. A quirky tidbit from an old source suggests that spoken intention can enhance a cure's effectiveness. You are skeptical, but you've noticed something interesting. People relax when you speak calmly. Their breathing slows, their fear eases. If that helps the body heal, you're not about to argue. You are careful to involve the church whenever possible. You recommend prayer alongside poultices. You frame your advice as support, not substitution. This is less about belief and more about optics. Healing that appears to exclude God tends to attract unwanted theological interest.
Historians still argue whether medieval healers truly understood anatomy or simply worked by observation and tradition. From your perspective, the distinction blurs. You observe, you adjust, you remember what works, and quietly abandon what doesn't. If that's not understanding, it's at least competence. Some treatments succeed. A fever breaks after days of careful care. A wound heals cleanly. Gratitude follows, along with whispers. Gratitude is dangerous. It turns private acts into shared stories. You accept thanks politely, but discourage praise. It would have healed anyway, you say. The body knows what to do. You hope that's true.
Some treatments fail. This is worse. You sit with someone whose condition worsens despite your efforts. You feel helpless, small, and acutely aware of your limitations. When death comes, as it sometimes does in this world, you retreat into silence. You attend funerals quietly, eyes down, heart heavy. Failure sticks longer than success. You make a private rule: never treat the same condition twice in public. Patterns invite attention. Instead, you vary your involvement. Sometimes you advise. Sometimes you step back. Sometimes you claim ignorance entirely. You are building not a reputation, but a lack of one.
There is humor, even here. You once prepare a soothing tea, only to be told it tastes suspiciously healthy. You apologize solemnly. Joke number 1. Next time, you'll add honey for deception. They laugh weakly, which you count as progress. You also notice how healing intersects with superstition. People ask about curses, bad air, evil eyes. You neither confirm nor deny. You redirect. Clean water, rest, nutrition. These are less exciting answers, but they work often enough to justify themselves.
At night, you study old medical texts when you can find them. Galen, Hippocrates. Their ideas about humors, blood, phlegm, black bile, yellow bile, are everywhere. You learn the theory because everyone else believes it, even if you privately suspect it explains less than people think. Still, knowing the language helps you blend in. One evening, you attempt bloodletting under supervision. It goes acceptably. You decide immediately that acceptable is not high enough standard, and quietly avoid offering it again. Joke number 2. Some skills are best left theoretical.
You begin to feel the emotional toll of this role. Every visit carries expectation. Every suggestion carries risk. You sleep lightly, replaying conversations, wondering if you missed a sign. You remind yourself that even trained physicians fail often in this era. This thought comforts and disturbs you in equal measure. Rumors circulate anyway. Some call you gifted, others call you strange. A few call you dangerous. You cannot control this. You can only control your behavior. You stay calm. You stay modest. You stay available, but not eager.
One afternoon, a child recovers unexpectedly after a simple remedy you suggest. The family praises you openly. You feel a flush of pride, followed by a cold wave of fear. Praise spreads. You gently insist it was luck, or God, or both. You do not argue with explanations that divert attention away from you. As you walk home that evening, you feel the strange balance you are maintaining. Healing gives you purpose, but it also sharpens the blade you're walking on. You are useful now. Useful people are noticed. Noticed people are judged.
Still, when someone thanks you quietly, eyes sincere, you feel something warm settle in your chest. You helped. In a small, fragile way, you made the world less painful for someone else. That matters. You lie down that night, herbs drying nearby, the smell earthy and calm. Your hands ache. Your mind hums. You think about how easily help becomes expectation, and expectation becomes obligation. Healing, you realize, is its own kind of magic, one that demands empathy, restraint, and an acceptance of failure. And while it may keep you alive for now, it also brings you closer to the very attention you've been trying so hard to avoid.
It starts, as these things often do, with an invitation that sounds flattering and feels heavy the moment you accept it. A message arrives through careful wording and indirect language. Someone of means has heard of you, someone curious, someone hopeful, someone who expects results. Patrons are a turning point in your life because they offer protection and danger in the same breath. A mainstream historical fact sits beneath this moment. Medieval scholars, astrologers, and alchemists often rely on wealthy patrons for funding, shelter, and legitimacy. Patronage keeps ideas alive. but it also ties them to expectations.
You travel to their estate with clean clothes and cleaner manners. The road is long, and you use the time to rehearse modesty. Modesty is your shield. You arrive at a stone house larger than any you've lived in, its walls solid and confident. Inside, tapestries soften the cold air, and servants move quietly, efficiently. This place does not doubt itself. Your patron greets you warmly. They speak of learning, of curiosity, of admiration for subtle minds. You nod, you smile. You keep your answers measured. This is not the moment to impress. This is the moment to appear useful without appearing powerful. They ask what you can do. You pause. You explain carefully. Observation, study, natural influences. You mention astrology, alchemy, healing, always framed as inquiry, never certainty. You emphasize limits. You say what you cannot do before what you can. This seems wise. It also seems not entirely believed. Your patron listens, eyes thoughtful. They nod slowly, then ask a question that tightens something in your chest. Can you improve outcomes? Increase fortune? Ensure success?
You choose your words like stepping stones. You say knowledge can guide choices. You say timing matters. You say nothing is guaranteed. They smile politely. You cannot tell if they are reassured or disappointed. A quirky tidbit floats through your thoughts. Some medieval patrons believed scholars worked best when slightly afraid of disappointing them. You decide quietly not to test the accuracy of that belief.
They offer you a room, food, materials, access to books. This is more than you've ever had. You accept, knowing that refusal would be suspicious, and acceptance will change everything.
At first, things go well. You study openly, discuss ideas with other learned guests, and enjoy the rare luxury of uninterrupted thought. You produce charts. You explain theories. You advise on timing for journeys or decisions. You remain cautious. You are praised for your restraint, which feels like being complimented for not touching a flame. Then, expectations shift. Subtly, a plan fails despite your advice. A harvest underperforms. A family member falls ill. None of this is your fault, but fault is not the issue. The issue is hope. Hope, you realize, is expensive. Your patron begins to ask more pointed questions. Why didn't this work? Could something else have been done? Are there deeper methods? You respond calmly, emphasizing uncertainty. You remind them that knowledge guides, but does not command. Historians still argue whether medieval patrons genuinely believed in magic or simply wanted reassurance dressed as expertise. Standing in that elegant hall, you suspect many want control, not truth. You feel the pressure to perform, not openly, never openly, but in the silences between questions, in the way conversations linger. You consider exaggerating just once, making a prediction sound stronger, offering confidence instead of caution. The thought passes, but it leaves a mark. You resist, mostly. You offer more detailed explanations instead. More charts, more context, more caveats. This helps for a while. Then comes the request that crosses an invisible line. They ask for certainty, not guidance, not likelihood, certainty. You feel the room change. You choose honesty, because dishonesty here would grow quickly and devour you. You explain, gently, that certainty belongs to God, not scholars. You watch their expression carefully.
They nod. Slowly, the conversation moves on, but something has shifted. From that day forward, you sense distance. Access to resources becomes slightly more restricted. Invitations are less frequent. You are still welcome, but no longer central. You understand the message. You were interesting when promising. You are inconvenient when honest. There is relief in this. There is also danger. Disappointment is unpredictable. You keep your belongings organized. You avoid private meetings. You prepare yourself to leave quickly if necessary. One evening, over a quiet meal, someone jokes that you should have tried harder. You laugh politely. Joke number 1. Yes, next time you'll consult the stars more loudly. No one laughs as much as you do.
You leave the estate not long after, citing the need to continue your studies elsewhere. Your patron agrees readily. The parting is polite, almost warm. You do not trust it. On the road again, you feel lighter and poorer. Patronage offered comfort, but it also sharpened expectations to a dangerous edge. You realize that wealth magnifies belief. When people invest in you, they want returns.
You think about those who stayed longer than you did, those who promised more, those who blurred lines. You wonder how many learned, too late, that failing a powerful person can be worse than never meeting them at all. As you walk, you make a new rule. Never become indispensable. Indispensable people are owned. You prefer uncertainty. It has kept you alive so far.
You reach a small town by nightfall and find a modest place to rest. No servants, no tapestries, just a fire, a bench, and the sound of ordinary life. You sleep better than you have in weeks. Patrons, you've learned, want miracles. You can offer insight, patience, and restraint, but miracles belong to stories, not survival. And as comforting as support can be, it is often the quiet refusal to promise too much that keeps you breathing in the end.
You become very good at listening for footsteps long before you hear voices. By now, you have learned that silence in a medieval town is rarely neutral. It hums with expectation, judgment, and the soft grinding of doctrine turning slowly but relentlessly. As you continue your life as a medieval magician, natural philosopher, astrologer, alchemist, healer, depending on who is asking, you discover that the greatest spell you must master is not written in any book. It is the art of not being noticed too much by the church.
You live in a world where nearly everything has a theological explanation. The weather, illness, good harvests, bad dreams, the way milk curdles too fast. God is everywhere, watching closely, and his representatives take their job very seriously. Officially, curiosity about the natural world is not forbidden. In fact, monasteries preserve learning, copy manuscripts, and quietly study astronomy and medicine. Unofficially, curiosity becomes suspicious the moment it looks like independence. You feel this tension every day, like a draft slipping under a door that never quite closes.
You attend Mass regularly. You bow your head at the right moments. You mutter prayers with convincing humility. This is not hypocrisy, it is survival. Medieval Europe does not separate belief from daily life. Faith is not something you have, it is something you perform, publicly and repeatedly. A missed service or an awkward pause during a prayer can undo years of careful restraint. You learn to look pious even while your mind quietly wonders why certain metals react the way they do when heated, or why the stars appear to wander against the fixed background of the heavens.
One mainstream historical fact presses constantly on your shoulders. The church is the primary authority over knowledge. Universities exist, yes, but they operate under theological oversight. Books are rare, expensive, and often chained to desks, literally. To own unusual texts, especially those translated from Arabic or Greek sources, is to invite questions. And questions, you have learned, are never just questions. They are auditions for suspicion. You soften your language when speaking about your work. You do not say forces or energies. You say God's design. You do not say cause and effect. You say divine order. You do not say experiment. You say observation with humility. It feels like walking a narrow bridge in soft shoes, knowing that one wrong word could echo farther than you intend. Historians still argue whether medieval scholars genuinely believed all this framing, or whether many were quietly translating curiosity into acceptable theology to stay alive and funded.
You are not alone in this balancing act. Clerics themselves debate how much natural inquiry is acceptable. Some argue that studying nature glorifies God by revealing his craftsmanship. Others worry that too much explanation leaves no room for mystery, and therefore no room for obedience. You sense this disagreement in subtle ways. A friar who lingers too long over your charts, a monk who asks pointed questions, a bishop who smiles without warmth. None of them accuse you of anything, not yet. That is how danger usually begins, politely.
There is also fear beneath the doctrine. Fear of disorder. Fear that if people believe the world operates according to discoverable rules, they might stop listening to sermons about sin and salvation. You, standing there with your instruments and notes, represent a future that no one has agreed is allowed. This is why even harmless things, astrolabes, mathematical tables, star charts, can feel threatening in the wrong hands, especially your hands. You recall a quirky but very real historical tidbit. Many medieval thinkers practiced what we would now call science, but wrapped it tightly in religious language. Astrology becomes reading God's signs in the heavens. Medicine becomes restoring God's intended balance. Alchemy becomes contemplating divine transformation. This is not just semantics, it is armor. Thin armor, yes, but better than none. You adopt it gratefully.
Still, whispers circulate. They always do. Someone remembers a failed prediction. Someone else recalls a strange smell from your workshop. Another mentions that you own too many books for someone without holy orders. None of this proves anything, but proof is not required for anxiety to grow. You start noticing how often sermons mention false prophets, cunning men, and the dangers of prideful knowledge. You tell yourself it is coincidence. You also pack a small bag, just in case.
You try to maintain relationships with local clergy, offering services that feel safe. You calculate feast days. You help determine the best times for planting, framed as harmonizing labor with God's will. You avoid discussing anything that sounds like inevitability or fate. Free will is not negotiable. You learn this the hard way after an offhand remark about stars influencing temperament earns you a long, quiet stare that lingers in your memory far too vividly.
At night, you lie awake listening to the soft sounds of the town settling. Distant footsteps, a dog barking, the wind pressing gently against shutters. This is when doubts creep in. Not about God, necessarily, but about your place in this world. You are not a rebel. You are not trying to challenge doctrine. You just want to understand things. Unfortunately, history has not yet invented the concept of harmless curiosity. Historians still argue whether medieval authorities truly feared magic itself, or simply feared people who operated outside approved hierarchies.
You notice that magic, as the church defines it, is conveniently broad. Miracles are acceptable if they happen to saints. Wonders are acceptable if approved by Scripture. Anything else risks being labeled superstition at best, heresy at worst. You exist in the foggy middle, where intentions are invisible, and outcomes matter less than interpretations. It is exhausting. You compensate by becoming very, very boring in public, a skill you did not expect to be life-saving.
Occasionally, you meet others like yourself, quiet scholars, cautious healers, astrologers who speak only in hypotheticals. You exchange knowing looks, but little else. Trust is a luxury you cannot afford. Even friendships must be carefully filtered through self-preservation. You joke, lightly, that if there were a spell for invisibility, it would simply be called acting normal. No one laughs too loudly. Despite everything, you persist, not because you are brave, but because you are curious, and curiosity is stubborn. You learn to move slowly, speak gently,
and frame everything as reverence rather than revelation. You survive another season, then another. You remain unaccused, uncelebrated, and alive, which, in your line of work, counts as success. And yet, as you drift towards sleep, you cannot shake the sense that the ground beneath you is always shifting. The church is patient. Doctrine is slow. Fear is quiet. You rest knowing that tomorrow will require the same careful performance, the same soft words, the same watchful listening. For now, though, the night holds, and no one is knocking.
Eventually, it is not the church that unsettles you most. It is the neighbors. Institutions move slowly. People do not. You learn this on an ordinary morning that begins with bread, smoke, and a faint sense of being watched. Nothing has changed, exactly, and yet everything feels tilted, as if the town has shifted a few inches while you slept.
You notice it first in the small ways. Conversations stop when you enter a room. A baker hesitates before handing you your loaf. A child points at your satchel and is gently pulled away. No one confronts you. No one needs to. Suspicion, you discover, does not announce itself. It accumulates quietly, like dust in corners. This is the danger of being known for unusual things in a medieval town. A mainstream historical fact underlies your unease. Most medieval communities are small, tight-knit, and deeply suspicious of difference. Reputation is everything. Once it shifts, it is nearly impossible to correct. You can be tolerated, even admired, right up until the moment you are not. Someone's cow has fallen ill. A baby has failed to thrive. A storm damaged the fields unexpectedly. These things happen all the time, but pattern seeking is a powerful human habit. People begin to connect dots that were never meant to touch. You have books. You track stars. You ask questions. You arrived not long before things went wrong. The logic is not sound, but it is compelling, especially when wrapped in fear. You keep your head down. You smile. You offer polite greetings. You attend Mass. You do nothing different, which somehow makes everything feel worse. There is a sense that restraint is now interpreted as secrecy. You consider leaving. You consider staying. Neither option feels safe. One afternoon, a neighbor approaches you with a problem. Their child has nightmares, bad ones. Waking screams, shaking hands, eyes wide with something they cannot name. The neighbor looks embarrassed, desperate, hopeful. You understand the risk instantly. Helping could bind them to you. Refusing could turn them against you. You choose the least dramatic option available. You listen. You suggest routine. Warm drinks, prayer, less food before sleep. You frame it as care, not cure. They nod, disappointed but grateful. Later, you hear that the nightmares stop on their own. This does not help you. Now your presence is associated with improvement, which is just as dangerous as failure. Joke number 1 floats through your mind. Apparently, even doing nothing correctly is suspicious now. You become aware of how stories travel, slowly, then all at once. A harmless comment becomes exaggerated. A guess becomes a claim. Someone says you predicted something accurately. You did not. But accuracy is not required for myth-making. It is enough that someone believes you might have. Historians still argue whether most medieval accusations of magic were driven by theology or by social tension. Living inside the moment, you suspect the answer is simpler. People look for causes when they feel powerless. You, with your quiet habits and odd tools, offer a shape that fear can grab onto. You adjust again. You simplify your life. You remove visible instruments from your workspace. You stop writing in public. You speak less. You become boring on purpose. This works, briefly. Then a new rumor surfaces. Someone claims you refused to help them. Someone else claims you helped too much. The contradiction does not matter. Consistency is not the goal. explanation is. A town meeting is called. Not about you, officially, but your name surfaces anyway, gently, like a stone tested for weight. Someone suggests asking questions. Someone suggests caution. Someone suggests prayer. You are not present. This is worse. Decisions made without you tend to be more decisive. That night, you pack. Not in a rush, not in panic. Calmly. You choose what matters most. Books are heavy. Knowledge is not portable. You take notes, not volumes. You leave behind anything that might look strange. You dress plainly. You prepare to go before dawn. As you wait, you reflect on a strange fringe tidbit you once heard. In some medieval communities, accused magicians survived by leaving quietly before accusations could harden into charges. No trial, no confrontation, just absence. You decide that disappearance is a kind of spell after all. You leave as the sky begins to pale. The town is quiet. No one stops you. No one chases you. You are not relieved. You are alert. Relief comes later, on the road, when the distance is measurable. Walking away, you think about how fragile tolerance is, how quickly usefulness turns into threat. You did not fail at magic. You failed at being ordinary enough for long enough. That is not a mistake you plan to repeat, though you suspect repetition is inevitable. By nightfall, you reach unfamiliar ground, new people, new routines, new chances to be misinterpreted. You feel tired, but not defeated. Survival, you've learned, is not about winning arguments or proving innocence. It is about timing, leaving before the question is asked, moving before the story settles. As you rest, you allow yourself one quiet joke, number 2 carefully counted, that perhaps the most powerful medieval magic is knowing when to walk away. You close your eyes knowing tomorrow will require reinvention again. A new town, a new version of yourself. The same careful balance. For now, though, the road holds you. No rumors follow. No whispers reach this far. You sleep with the knowledge that you are still ahead of the story, and in your world, that is the safest place to be. By the time you reach a small, unfamiliar village, you have perfected the art of being quietly present. You no longer carry the weight of past mistakes so openly. Instead, you carry habits, subtle, careful, deliberate, like armor no one can see. You have learned that survival is less about talent and more about timing, discretion, and the occasional well-placed smile. The village is calm in ways the last one was not. That's comforting. You are welcomed with polite curiosity rather than suspicion. Children peek at your satchel. The baker nods with a smile. The blacksmith pauses mid-hammering to acknowledge you. Nothing extraordinary has yet occurred. For the first time in weeks, you breathe easily, though cautiously. You set up a small room above a stable, borrowing space from a kindly widow who seems to have no questions about why you have more books than a schoolmaster or why your hands are perpetually ink-stained. It is simple and quiet. You feel the strange relief of anonymity. The night is full of soft animal sounds rather than gossip or suspicion. A mainstream historical fact helps you navigate this new space. Wandering scholars and itinerant healers often moved from village to village in medieval Europe, relying on goodwill and discretion. Many survived by keeping their knowledge useful but unobtrusive, blending their expertise with local practices, and always avoiding overt displays of power. You intend to do the same. You take inventory of your materials: parchment, quills, dried herbs, a small crucible, and a few glass vials. Everything is modest, functional, and unlikely to draw attention. You set aside time each morning to read, take notes, and refine your observations. These routines provide structure, even when the world outside feels unpredictable. A quirky tidbit you recall from your studies surfaces. Some medieval magicians used animals, like frogs or mice, as symbolic components in experiments, believing they carried particular cosmic or elemental properties. You smile and remind yourself never to mention such things aloud. Discretion has become a core part of your craft, even if it means abandoning intriguing ideas. You find small ways to integrate into village life without revealing too much. You help with minor ailments, fevers, headaches, small cuts, always framing your guidance as humble advice rather than knowledge beyond ordinary understanding. You show how to prepare herbal poultices, emphasize rest and hygiene, and offer simple observational techniques like noting weather patterns or moon phases. Your actions are practical, non-threatening, and firmly rooted in everyday life. Historians still argue whether medieval practitioners truly believed in magical practices, or whether many were simply performing socially acceptable rituals to maintain trust and authority. You are inclined to believe it is a mixture of both. You perform, in a sense, but only enough to be useful without drawing suspicion. You are cautious because usefulness alone can invite curiosity, and curiosity can be dangerous. Despite the quiet, your instincts remain alert. You watch how villagers interact, noting who observes more than others and who asks unusual questions. These observations help you gauge the social landscape. You learn who can be trusted, who might gossip, and who is harmlessly curious. It feels like reading a book written in subtle gestures, silences, and sidelong glances. You also continue to study an alchemy, but privately now. Charts, notes, and small experiments are conducted under low light, always mindful of noises and shadows. You do not want to be associated with the mystical in any overt way. Your survival depends on appearing ordinary, even mundane. Yet the quiet study provides comfort and a sense of control. One evening, a local priest stops by your door. He is polite, curious, and respectful, but you sense his attention is layered with assessment. You speak slowly, emphasize humility, and explain your work in terms of observation and God's natural order. He nods, satisfied. You realize that in order to continue surviving, you must constantly balance visibility with invisibility. You begin to notice how this constant vigilance shapes your thoughts. You think in layers: what you see, what you say, what you allow others to perceive. Every action is filtered through survival. You recognize patterns in human behavior more acutely, noticing how fear, hope, and ignorance intertwine to produce both trust and suspicion. This awareness is exhausting, but necessary. Jokes become a private relief. You imagine whispering to yourself, "Congratulations, you've mastered the art of being seen and ignored simultaneously." Joke number one surfaces, just enough to lighten your mind. You chuckle quietly, reminding yourself that humor is one of the few tools that does not attract scrutiny. Life in the village grows routine. You rise with the sun, take notes, tend to minor ailments, and observe the sky. You avoid unnecessary attention while continuing to expand your knowledge quietly. There is a strange rhythm to this existence, a balance between engagement and discretion. You begin to understand that survival is not about avoidance alone. It is about knowing when to act, when to speak, and when to remain silent. Yet, despite careful planning, you remain aware that danger is never far. A single misinterpreted action, an overheard remark, or an unexpected event could undo weeks of careful integration. The tension underlines every task, even the mundane. It is tiring, but it is reality, and you adapt, slowly internalizing this constant vigilance. At night, you lie awake, listening to the wind and the trees, the soft clatter of animals in the stable below, and the distant sounds of villagers settling in for sleep. You reflect on the delicate balance you maintain between usefulness and invisibility, knowledge and secrecy. curiosity, and caution. You drift toward rest with the awareness that tomorrow will require the same careful navigation, the same attention to nuance, the same quiet endurance that has kept you alive so far. Time passes differently when you live cautiously. Days are measured in small, deliberate movements, tending herbs, noting star positions, observing human behavior. Weeks fold into months without fanfare. You start to realize that survival is less about avoiding catastrophe than about cultivating a rhythm so steady that nothing feels urgent enough to attract scrutiny. The village settles into a predictable pattern, which is both comforting and quietly deceptive. Children play in the streets, farmers tend their fields, traders arrive and leave. On the surface, life is calm. Beneath, social currents swirl, carrying whispers and judgments that you must navigate invisibly. You move through these currents like a practiced swimmer, feeling the pull and adjusting course without creating ripples. A mainstream historical fact underscores the precariousness of your life. Medieval communities were tightly knit and intensely observant. Outsiders, itinerant scholars, and those with unusual skills were scrutinized constantly. Reputation, once tarnished, could not easily be repaired. You understand that every interaction, every observation, every piece of advice you offer carries consequences, sometimes long after the moment has passed.
You continue your studies in private. Alchemy, astrology, herbalism, and simple natural philosophy are pursued cautiously. Instruments are stored discreetly. Notes are encrypted with shorthand and symbols only you understand. Your life becomes a careful choreography of visibility and invisibility. A quirky tidbit from old manuscripts reminds you that some medieval magicians believed that careful secrecy amplified results, as if hidden knowledge held more power than knowledge displayed.
You chuckle quietly at this idea, acknowledging that, in your case, it is practical survival rather than metaphysics. People occasionally ask for advice. A merchant seeks guidance on the timing of his journey. A widow asks about herbs for a lingering cough. You respond with measured words, grounding your answers in observation and practical knowledge. You carefully avoid claiming insight beyond the ordinary. This restraint is not humility, it is armor. You know that too much perceived competence can attract both admiration and danger. Historians still debate whether medieval practitioners truly believed in magical forces or simply acted according to social expectations. From your perspective, the distinction matters little. What matters is maintaining balance, preserving freedom, and avoiding attention while still providing usefulness when needed. Survival is, in a sense, the most practical magic available.
One evening, you notice a subtle shift. A villager has been lingering, curious but cautious, watching your actions more closely than before. It is not outright suspicion, but curiosity can grow into suspicion if unchecked. You decide to offer a small gesture of ordinary kindness, helping repair a fence, adjusting a tool, offering practical advice unrelated to your studies. The gesture deflects attention without attracting notice. You think of it as a minor spell, protective and unobtrusive.
You begin to experiment quietly with more complex concepts, slight variations in herbal mixtures, adjustments to observations of planetary motion, gentle tests of cause and effect. These experiments are framed as extensions of everyday observation, never declared as breakthroughs. You are aware that novelty is dangerous. Familiarity is your ally. Jokes surface in these private moments. You whisper to yourself, "Congratulations, you've managed to practice science without anyone calling you a heretic." For now. Joke number 1, safely contained, gives you a faint sense of amusement. You allow yourself a few minutes to enjoy it. Humor, you remind yourself, is a survival tool. Night brings reflection.
You lie awake, listening to the village settle. Soft winds, distant animals, muted conversations. You contemplate the delicate balance you maintain, being useful yet unremarkable, knowledgeable yet cautious, curious yet restrained. The tension is constant, but it has become familiar. You recognize that mastery of this tension is the true skill keeping you alive. Occasionally, you receive letters from distant acquaintances, other scholars, travelers, or former patrons. They discuss ideas, theories, and observations. You respond cautiously, mindful that written words can be misinterpreted if they fall into the wrong hands. Your replies are measured, deliberately mundane, preserving both communication and discretion. A minor incident tests your careful balance. A child accidentally discovers one of your charts, curious about the lines and symbols. You handle the situation lightly, redirecting the child's attention to something harmless, framing your work as a simple puzzle rather than mystical knowledge. The child leaves satisfied, unaware of the layers you have concealed. The lesson is reinforced. Attention, even accidental, can be dangerous if not gently managed.
You notice a personal change. You are more patient, more attentive, and acutely aware of the impact of every action. Your senses are finely tuned to social cues, environmental shifts, and subtle signs of danger. This heightened awareness is exhausting, but it is also empowering. Knowledge is power, yes, but survival requires the judicious application of knowledge, like seasoning measured precisely in a delicate recipe.
Life continues in this delicate rhythm. You rise with the sun, work quietly, observe carefully, and sleep lightly. Each day is an exercise in balance. Each interaction is weighed, calibrated, and adjusted. You have become a master of subtlety, blending usefulness with discretion, curiosity with caution. In this rhythm, you find a strange comfort. The world is unpredictable, but you have carved out a space where you can navigate it without drawing undue attention.
As night falls, you allow yourself a quiet reflection. You consider how far you have come, from a curious outsider experimenting with alchemy and astrology to a cautious, observant presence in a village that barely notices you. Survival has taught you patience, discretion, and resilience. You understand now that being a magician is less about spells and more about strategy, perception, and the careful calibration of one's own presence. You drift to sleep with a sense of cautious satisfaction, aware that tomorrow will bring the same careful dance, the same attentiveness, and the same subtle, unassuming magic that has kept you alive thus far. Winter arrives quietly, settling over the village with soft, persistent frost. Smoke curls from chimneys in the dim morning light, and the ground is glazed with a thin layer of ice that makes every step deliberate. You move carefully, aware that missteps are as dangerous for your body as they are for your reputation. Slipping in public draws attention, and attention, you have learned, is the first step toward questions you may not want to answer. Life slows in winter, giving you space to reflect. The village itself feels more watchful under the stark trees and long nights. People are indoors, moving less, gossiping more. Fires crackle in homes, filling the air with a comforting, smoky warmth. You are grateful for the relative quiet, though you know it is deceptive. Suspicion thrives in stillness as easily as in chaos. You continue your private studies. Alchemy, herbalism, and astrology occupy long hours by the hearth, illuminated by flickering candlelight. Small experiments occupy your attention, dissolving minerals, drying herbs for medicinal mixtures, mapping the constellations. Each task is measured and deliberate. Precision, you remind yourself, is survival. A mainstream historical fact underpins your work.
Medieval scholars often relied on natural cycles, lunar phases, seasonal changes, and plant behaviors to inform both medicine and agricultural advice. Knowledge of the natural world is considered valuable, but only when framed appropriately. You have learned to frame everything in terms of observation and God's design, careful to avoid the appearance of forbidden expertise.
You notice the frost on your windows in the early morning light and pause to study the patterns. Ice crystals form intricate, repeating shapes, delicate and ephemeral. You consider their symmetry and variation, recognizing the subtle beauty in natural laws. You whisper to yourself, perhaps even frost follows a divine formula. A quirky tidbit occurs to you. Some medieval manuscripts describe frost as a sign from angels, a bridge between the heavens and the earth. You smile at the coincidence and make a mental note to keep that story in mind when explaining natural phenomena to villagers.
Your work as a healer continues quietly. People visit for minor ailments exacerbated by the cold, coughs, stiff joints, colds, and fevers. You offer warmth, simple remedies, and calm instruction. Nothing extravagant, nothing that could invite suspicion. A cup of herbal tea, a poultice for a stiff shoulder, a careful observation of diet and activity. Healing becomes almost meditative in its repetition.
Historians still argue whether medieval practitioners believed their methods had inherent power, or if the power was in the perception of care. You have little time for debate. You only know what works, enough to keep both people and yourself safe. Comfort, reassurance, and observable results are more valuable than theoretical certainty.
One evening, a minor snowstorm traps you in the house for several days. You use the time to review notes, organize herbs, and observe the changing patterns of light and shadow. Your candles burn low, filling the room with soft, flickering warmth. Outside, the wind presses against shutters, rattling them gently. Inside, you feel a rare sense of calm. The village sleeps. You are alive. You are unseen.
A neighbor drops by with a question about livestock. You listen carefully, offering measured advice about diet and shelter. You notice subtle signs of fatigue and worry in the person's posture. You provide reassurance with gentle observation and practical tips, deliberately avoiding anything that might hint at hidden knowledge. You smile lightly, whispering a joke only you will hear. It's easier to survive frost than curiosity. Joke number 1 of the section, quietly amusing.
You reflect on the importance of balance. Curiosity must be tempered by caution. Knowledge must be wielded with discretion. Survival, you realize, is less about brilliance and more about subtlety, observation, and patience. Each day offers small lessons: how to speak without drawing attention, how to act without arousing suspicion, how to blend usefulness with invisibility.
The snow deepens and travel becomes difficult. You remain in the village, observing the stars on clear nights and tracking lunar phases as a means of timing herb drying and subtle experiments. Astrology is safer in winter because villagers pay less attention outdoors, and the night is long enough to study without interruption. You measure the moon's path and mark the constellations. Each observation is a small anchor in a world that can shift unpredictably. A fringe practice, you recall, surfaces. Some medieval magicians and scholars believed that winter provided a liminal time when the boundary between the mundane and the mystical was thinner. You smile at the idea, acknowledging it only in thought. You do not speak of it aloud. Survival has taught you that even the vaguest hint of the mystical can invite misinterpretation. Even as the season deepens, the village continues its rhythm. Fires burn steadily. People move carefully across the frozen paths. You remain quiet, observing, learning, adapting. Each interaction is small, careful, unremarkable. You continue your work with herbs, your observations of stars.
your studies of alchemy and natural philosophy, all quietly framed as ordinary practice. You pause one evening to reflect on your own growth. Months of cautious navigation have refined your awareness. You read human behavior with a sharper eye. You notice gestures, silences, and glances that reveal more than words. You understand patterns that extend beyond your immediate surroundings, recognizing how curiosity, fear, and expectation intertwine to shape social perception. As you settle for sleep, you notice the cold pressing through the walls. You wrap yourself in blankets, listening to the soft hush of snow falling outside. The village sleeps, unaware of the quiet scholar who walks the line between curiosity and discretion, knowledge and survival. You drift into rest with the satisfaction of having endured another season, knowing that tomorrow, like every day, will demand the same careful balance that has kept you alive this long.
Spring arrives slowly, nudging the landscape awake with longer days and softer light. The frost recedes, revealing the earth beneath, dark and fertile, smelling faintly of damp leaves and growth. You step outside and feel the warmth on your hands, a small blessing you almost take for granted after months of cold. The village seems more lively. People move faster, speak more loudly, and gather in small clusters. Life has returned to its cyclical rhythm, but with it comes a subtle undercurrent, renewed observation, renewed gossip, and renewed expectations. You note immediately that spring is a dangerous season for someone like you. People have energy, curiosity, and attention to spare. Their eyes are brighter, their questions sharper, and the chance of being noticed grows. A mainstream historical fact underscores this shift. Agricultural cycles dictated much of medieval life. With planting, tending, and market preparation underway, villagers are more alert to advice and intervention, especially from someone who has a reputation for insight. You need to tread lightly. Your mornings are spent observing the land. You watch the farmers' routines, the way oxen pull plows, the subtle differences in soil moisture, and the timing of planting relative to moon phases. You take careful notes in small, discrete books, jotting observations about plant growth and soil quality. This is not unusual. Observing farming practices is practical, and villagers appreciate guidance framed in terms of common sense rather than mystical insight. You continue private studies in herbalism and alchemy, though now the ingredients are fresh rather than dried. Sprigs of rosemary, thyme, and sage appear in small bundles around your workspace, and you carefully track their growth and potency. Experiments are modest: infusions, poultices, and natural extracts. Your focus is on subtlety, restraint, and effectiveness rather than spectacle. Even as the plants grow and bloom, you remain conscious of discretion. A quirky tidbit from your readings crosses your mind. Some medieval herbalists believed that herbs harvested at certain lunar phases contained enhanced potency. You smile at the coincidence, thinking that, if nothing else, careful timing encourages patience and attention. You keep your experiments low profile, observing quietly, measuring cautiously, and avoiding any display that might draw attention from those who view such practices with suspicion. Village life brings small, steady demands. People request guidance for minor ailments aggravated by the changing season, joint pain returning after winter, digestive troubles from new foods, fevers from sudden temperature swings. You respond with measured advice, emphasizing rest, diet, and observation, rather than claiming miraculous intervention. You have learned that modest assistance is safest, even when people hope for something more. Historians still debate the extent to which medieval practitioners believed in the mystical properties of herbs versus following tradition and social expectation. You no longer concern yourself with debate. What matters is maintaining balance, helping without overstepping, guiding without drawing undue attention, and appearing ordinary
while quietly preserving knowledge. One afternoon, a local family seeks advice about planting. They have relied on your guidance before, though they remain unaware of the breadth of your private studies. You offer timing suggestions based on weather and lunar phases, framing everything as practical observation. They nod appreciatively, satisfied by the straightforward guidance. Joke number 1 crosses your mind. Apparently, moonlight is useful for farmers, but harmless for magicians, which suits you just fine. You notice subtle shifts in the social fabric. Villagers whisper quietly about other neighbors, comparing planting methods, sharing stories of fortune or misfortune. You remain an observer, careful not to engage in speculation. Even a seemingly harmless comment could spiral into suspicion. Your survival depends on neutrality, on being useful without appearing influential.
Your personal habits are more refined now. You rise before dawn, review your notes, tend herbs, and observe stars. Evenings are spent quietly, preparing for the next day. You have developed rituals that reinforce both discipline and discretion, careful note-keeping, discreet cleaning of instruments, and private reflection. These rituals help you maintain focus and avoid missteps.
A minor challenge emerges when a traveling merchant arrives in the village, boasting knowledge from distant towns. He is curious about your studies and asks questions that flirt with forbidden topics: astrology, alchemy, and the hidden properties of plants. You respond carefully, deflecting most questions and emphasizing practical observation. You smile politely, noting internally that curiosity can be dangerous when paired with attention.
Despite careful measures, rumors start to resurface. A villager recalls a previous success you advised. Another wonders about your instruments, and a few whisper about your foreign texts. These murmurs are subtle, indirect, but you notice them. Suspicion grows in the quietest corners. You remind yourself that being too visible, even while harmless, is a risk. Nightfall brings a soft hush over the village. You sit by the hearth, reviewing notes and charts. The stars shine above, clear and steady. Observing them offers comfort, a reminder of constancy in a world that is otherwise unpredictable. Astrology, though practiced quietly now, continues to provide both solace and structure. You trace constellations with a careful finger, remembering earlier lessons about restraint and discretion.
You reflect on your months of cautious living. Each season has brought challenges, tests of patience, and moments of quiet insight. You have learned to navigate suspicion, social observation, and the delicate balance between usefulness and invisibility. You have survived, not because of magical prowess, but because of attentiveness, prudence, and an awareness of human nature.
As you prepare for sleep, you wrap yourself in blankets and listen to the village settle for the night. Soft winds rustle through budding trees, and the occasional bird settles in a nest unseen. You feel the quiet satisfaction of survival, tempered by the knowledge that vigilance is continuous. Tomorrow will demand the same care, the same attentiveness, the same subtle balancing act.
But for now, you allow yourself a moment of calm, trusting that the delicate equilibrium you have cultivated will carry you through another day. Summer arrives in a blaze of sunlight and warmth, transforming the village from a quiet, measured place into a lively hub of activity. Fields sway with ripening crops, children run barefoot across the dusty streets, and the air carries the mingling scents of fresh bread, smoke, and the earthy perfume of flowering plants. You feel the heat pressing against your skin, a constant reminder that seasons bring not only life, but also observation. People watch more closely when energy and movement are high.
You notice immediately that summer is a tricky season for someone like you. The warmth encourages social gatherings, market days, feasts, weddings, and informal visits. Each event brings both opportunity and risk. A mainstream historical fact reminds you that in medieval Europe, communal life intensified in the summer months. Villagers relied on each other for food, labor, and protection,
and any perceived anomaly in behavior or skill was far more visible when people gathered frequently. You adapt accordingly, careful to maintain the invisible balance you've cultivated.
Your mornings begin before dawn. You rise with the first hint of light, noting the temperature, observing the dew on the grass, and checking the alignment of the stars. Even as the village hums with activity, you maintain a private rhythm. Herbs require watering, notes must be reviewed, and observations of both natural and human patterns are essential. You continue your quiet studies in alchemy and astrology, always ensuring they remain subtle, practical, and easily defensible should anyone ask.
A quirky tidbit crosses your mind. Some medieval scholars believed that summer solstice energies intensified plant potency and the efficacy of minor magical acts. You smile quietly to yourself, acknowledging that whether or not it is true, the idea encourages careful attention to timing, a principle you have found invaluable for survival. You continue harvesting herbs at precise times, noting their aroma, color, and texture, always framing your practice as meticulous observation rather than esoteric ritual. Village life keeps you occupied. Minor ailments proliferate in the heat. Fevers, digestive issues, sunburns, and insect bites. You respond carefully, offering remedies rooted in practicality, poultices, teas, dietary adjustments, and rest in shaded areas. Your guidance is understated, framed in terms of experience and observation rather than hidden knowledge. People accept your advice, and you remain quietly useful without attracting undue attention.
Historians still debate the extent to which medieval magicians were genuinely believed to wield influence versus serving as socially sanctioned advisors and healers. In practice, you find that the distinction is irrelevant. What matters is blending utility with invisibility, providing enough help to maintain goodwill while never appearing so powerful that scrutiny is unavoidable.
One afternoon, the village hosts a midsummer festival. Music drifts from a central square, and the air is thick with laughter, conversation, and baked goods. You attend quietly, taking careful note of interactions, social hierarchies, and patterns of influence. You observe who dominates conversations, who listens quietly, and who whispers behind hands. These small observations are survival tools, allowing you to navigate social terrain while remaining unobtrusive.
A local child approaches you, curious about the small vials and tools you carry. You kneel, speaking gently, framing your explanation as a harmless observation of plants and their effects, rather than a display of arcane skill. The child nods, satisfied, and runs off. You note with quiet amusement that even curiosity can be tamed with careful framing, a skill more valuable than any spell you have studied. Joke number 1 surfaces here. Apparently, making children think you're boring is itself a minor magic.
You maintain routines of study and observation. Nights are for reflection, reviewing herb growth, noting planetary positions, and planning practical advice for villagers. Days are for cautious engagement, offering guidance on crops, minor ailments, and timing of daily activities. You learn to read subtle signals, hesitation in speech, slight gestures, lingering glances. Each observation informs how you interact, ensuring that usefulness never tips into suspicion.
The summer sun also brings new challenges. Travelers pass through the village, asking questions about distant lands, medicinal practices, and local customs. You answer cautiously, always emphasizing experience over hidden knowledge. Even a casual remark could spread rumors, so you choose words with precision. Historians still argue whether itinerant scholars were truly feared for their abilities or envied for their knowledge. You suspect both. Attention brings both admiration and danger, often in equal measure.
By midsummer, you have established a rhythm that balances private study, public discretion, and careful observation. You are useful enough to remain welcomed, but subtle enough to avoid becoming a focus of scrutiny. Your life is a delicate equilibrium, maintained through patience, attentiveness, and measured action. Even as you move through days filled with activity, you notice the mental and emotional toll of constant vigilance. You are alert at all times, monitoring both people and environment, interpreting every gesture, and weighing each word. Your awareness is sharper than ever, though exhaustion occasionally threatens your focus. You remind yourself that the cost of a moment's distraction could be high.
Nightfall brings relief. The village grows quiet under a sky streaked with stars. You light candles, review notes, and prepare for the next day. The air is warm but calm. In the distance, music and laughter fade. You reflect on your ability to remain alive, unseen yet useful, amidst the swirling energy of summer life.
You consider the long journey so far, from winter's isolation to spring's cautious growth, and now summer's vibrant scrutiny. Each season has demanded a new application of skill, observation, and restraint. You have learned that survival is a constant act of adaptation, awareness, and subtlety. Joke number 2 surfaces in your mind. The most powerful magic is knowing when to speak, when to act, and when to melt into the background.
As you prepare for sleep, you wrap yourself in a blanket, feeling the gentle warmth of a lingering summer breeze. You reflect on the balance you have maintained, knowledge with discretion, curiosity with caution, usefulness with invisibility. Each day is a reminder that survival is less about spells or power, and more about patience, observation, and the careful orchestration of presence.
You drift toward rest, aware that the village sleeps and the world outside remains unpredictable. Yet within the rhythm you have established, you find solace. Tomorrow will demand the same careful navigation, the same awareness, and the same quiet vigilance that has allowed you to endure through seasons of frost, growth, and sun. For now, the night holds you gently, and you rest in the comfort of survival, achieved not through magic, but through attention, prudence, and subtlety.
Autumn arrives quietly, like a whispered warning, painting the trees in shades of amber, rust, and gold. The air cools, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and wood smoke. It is a reflective season, one that demands attention to detail and preparation. You notice how quickly light fades, how shadows stretch long across the village paths, and how the wind carries subtle messages of change. You have learned to read these signs with care, knowing that survival is often a matter of perception and timing, rather than raw skill.
The villagers settle into routines that reflect the shortening days. Harvests dominate conversations, and the pressure to prepare for winter creates a quiet tension in the community. You move through this rhythm as you have through all previous seasons, balancing visibility with discretion. A mainstream historical fact underscores your strategy. In medieval Europe, the harvest season was both labor-intensive and socially charged. Villagers scrutinized those who offered guidance or advice, particularly outsiders with unusual knowledge. You tread carefully, offering assistance framed as practical observation rather than expertise. Your mornings are crisp, wrapped in layers of wool to keep the chill at bay. You rise with the sun, tending herbs and reviewing notes. Plants are harvested for drying and storage, carefully cataloged for future use. Experiments are subtle: tinctures, infusions, and careful observation of natural processes. Your studies remain private, quiet, and deliberate, forming the invisible backbone of your survival. A quirky historical tidbit floats to mind. Some medieval herbalists believed that herbs harvested in autumn contained latent energies from the waning sun, which could enhance their potency. You smile quietly, amused by the notion, but you also recognize its practical value. Timing your work with seasonal cycles improves results, and it ensures that your activities remain rational in appearance. Survival is, after all, an exercise in framing. Village life continues its rhythm. Minor ailments appear with the changing season: coughs, fevers, joint pains, and fatigue. You offer remedies with precision and restraint. A poultice here, a tea there, advice on rest and diet. You remain quietly effective without drawing attention, knowing that overt competence can be dangerous. Historians still argue whether practitioners were feared for their knowledge or envied for their discretion. You suspect both are true.
Interactions with villagers are measured. A local asks about the best way to preserve apples. You explain simple techniques, framing your advice as learned through observation rather than expertise. A neighbor questions the timing of planting garlic for next spring. You respond with careful guidance, avoiding any suggestion of mystical influence. Every word is calibrated, every gesture considered. Joke number 1 surfaces in mind. Apparently, even being mundane requires finesse.
As the harvest concludes, you notice subtle shifts in social dynamics. Rumors, whispers, and stories circulate, as they always do. Some reflect past successes, others hint at unproven suspicions. You navigate this carefully, never engaging, never contradicting unnecessarily. Silence and neutrality are your most potent tools. You have become adept at reading intentions through nuance, a pause, a glance, a tone of voice. Survival depends on such observations. Autumn nights are long and filled with quiet reflection. You sit by candlelight, reviewing notes, tracking lunar phases, and planning for the coming winter. The stars offer constancy in a world that is otherwise unpredictable. You trace their patterns, observing subtle shifts and movements, grounding yourself in regularity while remaining invisible to casual observers. Astrology has become both a personal compass and a shield. It is knowledge that sustains without alarming.
A minor challenge arises when a traveling scholar visits the village, curious about your work. Questions skirt the edge of what is safe: celestial influence, rare herbs, alchemical processes. You respond with care, emphasizing observation over claim, humility over authority. You notice how quickly curiosity can become suspicion, and you deflect with tact and precision. Survival depends on this careful calibration. As the days shorten, you begin to reflect on your journey. From patronage to suspicion, from frost to harvest, you have learned that the life of a medieval magician is less about spells or mystical prowess than about patience, awareness, and the quiet mastery of perception. You understand now that survival is crafted through restraint, observation, and the subtle orchestration of presence. You are tired, yet vigilant. Each season has honed your instincts. Each interaction has taught lessons about human nature, social perception, and the fragile balance between usefulness and danger. You have endured through the scrutiny of neighbors, the curiosity of travelers, and the quiet weight of rumor. You have survived because you have learned to blend, to observe, and to remain discreet. As you settle for the night, the chill of autumn softened by blankets and the gentle glow of candlelight, you reflect on the quiet mastery that has sustained you. The village sleeps, the wind whispers through bare branches, and the world seems paused, suspended between the fading warmth of summer and the promise of winter. Your thoughts drift gently, untangling the tension of long days and heavy observation, finding solace in the steady rhythms you have cultivated. You breathe slowly, feeling the quiet in your bones, the calm in your mind. The lessons of seasons past, the careful observation, the subtle guidance, the quiet restraint, merge into a single comforting pattern. You realize that survival is not about grandeur,
power or acclaim. It is about awareness, patience, and the gentle art of navigating human nature. You have lived through suspicion, curiosity, and expectation, and in doing so, have discovered the power of subtlety itself.
Outside, leaves rustle faintly, the wind shifting in an ancient rhythm. The village rests under the soft glow of the moon, and you allow yourself to sink fully into the warmth of your blankets. Each inhale, each exhale, draws the tension from your shoulders. The night hums quietly, carrying the soft assurance of continuity, observation, and quiet endurance.
You drift towards sleep, letting the past seasons, the challenges, and the careful steps of survival fade into gentle shadow. The world will continue tomorrow, unpredictable and complex, but for tonight, it is calm, steady, and forgiving. You rest in the knowledge that awareness, patience, and subtlety have guided you safely through the tapestry of life, and that for now, you are unseen, untroubled, and wholly at peace. Sweet dreams.